You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. Episode 3, The Problem with Traditional PMO Models. Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to episode 3, talking all things traditional PMO models. For those who know me, I have been working in the corporate space for about 15 years. And the reason I tell you that is because it's going to be relevant for what we're discussing today around PMO. I'm very, very passionate about all things to do with PMO. I've seen the good, I've seen the bad, and I've seen the ugly. I've had the opportunity to work across a number of different industries within the PMO space and run different levels of PMO structures, from enterprise level PMOs, program level, project level, and even portfolio level PMOs. Working across different industries, from mining to pharmaceuticals and banking and utilities and transport, media, actually working in those different industries has helped me to ascertain and understand what works and what doesn't across PMOs. The PMOs across the industries also vary. Compliance rules and regulations, say in banking and financials, will vary vastly to the regulations and rules around a transport type of business PMO. And so having the opportunity to work in the different PMOs themselves, I've actually been able to see a lot of the things that don't work and also some of the things that could be improved. Now, we'll put my hand up and say that I have been working in the PMO space, and I've probably been one of the many PMO managers out there who has run a PMO in a very reactive way. PMO managers will often you'll bump into someone in the corridor and you'll ask them how their day's going, and they'll say, I'm busy, it's reporting week, or it's end of month financials, or, I've got to create something for a steering committee. It's very a consistent theme with how busy they are. And I know that because I was one of those very busy PMO managers. We all know that busy can mean different things. Sometimes busy can mean we're being awfully productive, and sometimes not so productive. That being said, when we think about the PMO model, the traditional PMO model, if we just talk a little bit about that, I want you to kind of help understand a little bit more about where PMOs came from. There are different schools of thought around the origination and origins of PMO, but I'm just going to go based on, one that's more globally recognized, and that is that PMOs in effect came into the wide world around the 1950s. Some will say it's the 1930s where the concept came into play, but I'm going to talk about the 1950s, where it's understood that during the US military development of their complex missile systems and the nature of how large and complex that project and sub-project structure was going to be, they identified a need to centralize the approach for how those projects and sub-projects would be managed, and also, in fact, how the funding would be managed. And they're typical activities that a PMO today still follows. In fact, it's at the heart, having some form of method or approach and actually helping the project community to be aware and to utilize that approach, and also being involved in funding is, two of the key activities that I would argue that almost any PMO would do, depending on obviously the size of the PMO and the level of maturity, and also the level of resourcing that the PMO has. So the PMO came into fruition around the 1950s, and that was mainly the reasons why in the 1950s it came about. But the PMO has continued to become more widely known, and now, in fact, I would argue that any industry has had or does have. This is the problem with unedited podcasts. You get the raw opinions and also information that sometimes might be myself speaking awfully too fast. So I apologize about that. But when we talk about PMOs and we think about how they've changed since the 1950s, well, as I just mentioned, we're in 2018, and the majority of PMOs, if not all of them, I would say, centralized funding and manage approaches for how projects and sub-projects manages, whether that's a particular methodology that they help roll out, be it Prince 2 or PMBOK, or whether it's actually defining a new life cycle approach. For example, in some of the banking organizations I've worked in, they often create their own, and it's a hybrid, and that's okay. It works for their organization. The bigger the organization, the more likely they are to create a hybrid approach to methodologies. But I think every organization will tailor their hybrid approach and use concepts from, Prince 2 or PMBOK, and, these days looking at SAFe, Agile, etc. Now, if you think about the PMOs from the 1950s and where they are today, I don't believe they've evolved very much. I mean, in 15 years of working within the PMO space and projects and programs, as I said, across different industries and organizations, I've seen a lot of different definitions of PMO. I've seen a lot of different opinions on what the PMO does and what they do, even debates around what the P in PMO stands for. And I guarantee you that that's something you've probably heard of as well, because it's something that is often debated and is commonly asked. Is P for project? Is it P for program? Regardless of what the P stands for, the PMO centralizes funding and approaches. And then, like I said, they're two of the key activities that a PMO runs and does. But when we think about the PMOs and how they run and how they vary across industries and organizations, really at the heart of it, other than having some unique aspects that suit the specific industry, and as I mentioned, things like regulatory and compliance needs, where there is a differentiator between how governance is done in banking and financial to, say, maybe pharmaceuticals or manufacturing, ultimately, the concept of the PMO is vastly the same. I mean, why do you think there is over 286 job positions for PMO managers as of August on LinkedIn, for example? If you open up even just half of those position descriptions, or even a quarter, maybe even 10 of them, I guarantee you'll find that the content of those position descriptions is very, very similar. At the end of the day, PMO is done a certain way in different organizations to meet the objectives of the organization. And the PMO managers coming in will have different flavors of how they run PMO. Some will have a more structured way of the way that they like to do things. Still today, there's a lot of PMOs that run a command and control type model. Either way, regardless of how the PMOs themselves are running, there is still limitations in the traditional PMO approach that many take. Now, I'm not saying that every single PMO, in fact, follows the exact same approach, but I can say firsthand through my personal experience and through conversations with others, even as recently as last week, that the traditional PMO model that is being run at the moment in organizations is not keeping up with the changes in the delivery approaches. If you think about it, project management and project delivery has evolved. It's evolved so much. I mean, you'll hear all these buzzwords and all these information around agile and digital transformation and whatnot. And there's all these things that are happening in the delivery space where in fairness to PMOs, a lot of the attention is driven. I mean, I've worked in organizations many times where the PMO is always the first to go. The PMO is always the first team to get cut, and the PMO is the first team to, the last team to get funding rather, because the focus is so intently on delivery. And look, I understand that delivery is important, but a really strong PMO can help an organization to deliver outstanding results. For example, recently in the last couple of years, myself and my team worked within a large department of one of the big four banks. And working there, we helped to support the implementation of over 25 global installations on a project, or 25 implementations, if you like, over a 2.5 year period. Now, although the project overall was run in a waterfall way, within the PMO itself, we ran it using the AMO method and using an agile approach to the way that we were supporting the delivery teams. We supported the delivery teams and the executives in a very proactive way. And that enabled them to deliver more because they weren't spending so much time focusing on the administrative side of the delivery and the governance needs. I mean, I'm not saying that project managers don't need to spend time on admin. There is aspects of admin that are absolutely important and relevant. For example, providing input to management reports. For example, the project community are the people who are driving that and are effectively the best place to provide content for something like that. But what I'm saying is, when you have senior executive leaders who are sitting there and sitting there and creating purchase orders, or approving timesheets for, developers in a team that's far removed from their management circle, or when you've got a senior executive who has to review 40-page reports to understand what's going on with the project, or when you've got a senior manager who has to look in 5 or 6 different resource spreadsheets to find out what resources are becoming available, or when you have a senior manager who has to approve recruitment for someone that is in one of their direct reports team, in their team below that again, the senior leaders that are undertaking these types of tasks are effectively not being used in the right capacity. I mean, they're senior leaders in these organizations for a reason, and to have them involved in all of the administrative aspects such as that, because their governance or PMO model is not set up or structured in a way that enables them to be supported proactively, is going to be a challenge, because it's something that should be taken care of by the supportive governance bodies, whether that's your PMO or whatever you call it. The challenge is that although there are best intentions with improving and uplifting and enhancing the way that a PMO function is running, we're not getting it right the first time. We're not getting it right the first iteration. I mean, not getting it right the first iteration results in constant budget and schedule overruns. I mean, if we don't manage our resources properly and we don't support the project delivery community in managing resources properly, then we're going to lead to budget and schedule overruns. Everyone I've seen in all the organizations I've worked in are always using best endeavors, and they are trying to improve. But the challenge lies in organizations where everybody is trying to improve in isolation. Let me give you an example case in point. Another organization that I worked at in the last few years, I was working within a really large department within Australia. And in this particular department, there was approximately 12 different leads who were responsible for making sure that the right resources were available, allocated, and managed well, what we would call workforce management. The 12 leads had to make their updates and communicate changes and discuss with other leads about, resource contentions, recruit, hire, all the things that come under resource management. This is what the 12 leads had to do. Now, the 12 leads themselves were using a process that was very, very manual. The process itself was quite overbearing, and it was not a consistent approach, in the sense that whenever a particular lead wanted to make certain changes, the changes that were being made on their side to suit what they needed would not actually translate to the other leads and the other parts of the business. So what ended up happening was there was confusion that was being created and a bit of chaos. In fact, there were so many changes happening within this particular Excel tool that it was causing chaos for other people within the department, including the PMO. If we think about what I just mentioned around everyone trying to improve in isolation, you've got the PMO focusing on trying to make sure that the leads follow and use this particular tool in a certain way. But then you've also got the leads who are expecting the tool to work for them in a certain way. And then you've got people that are accessing the tool for up the line reporting as well. Everybody was trying to modify to suit their own use. They were working in isolation, thinking that they were actually improving the tool, but in fact, it was actually causing a lot of confusion. Now, we worked together to identify a more refined approach to workforce management that integrated with not only their Excel tool, but also other tools such as SharePoint, something that they had already existing. They didn't have to purchase and spend any money on new tools. And we worked together to create a method around the workforce management that would actually work for everybody. See, what was happening there as that example was, again, the traditional PMO model is very reactive. Someone will say that we need something and the PMO will react and try to support sometimes, and sometimes maybe not so much supportive, depending on the type of PMO that you're working with, and actually reacting as opposed to being proactive. A lot of the time the PMOs have best intention and have thought that they maybe have the best way of doing something, but then you've got the project management community who also has suggestions on the best way of doing things. And while their efforts are all well-intentioned and they're typically working to the same goals and objectives, they are not necessarily aligned. The traditional PMO model is really focusing on working independently of the project management community and creating a model that enables the project management community to follow and adhere to the processes defined by the traditional PMO. The processes and the functions within the traditional PMO are not necessarily, and really rarely, I would say, created in collaboration with the project management community. And often the traditional PMO model will accept changes requested by them from an enterprise PMO or from another department within the organization, but not actually understand what the benefits of making certain changes are. So making changes for the sake of making changes, and these changes are typically neither understood or realized. And so the reason for that particular change is also not looked at in organizational context. And what this refers to is PMOs are so busy in doing what they need to do because they are very reactive to the project management community that they are often not looking at things within organizational context. And that could be a really, really big problem. Another organization that I have worked with previously went into developing a brand new PPM tool. And the PPM tool that they decided to use was something that was available out of the box, but they then spent a considerable amount of time and investment financially to change the tool to suit what they needed within their organization. Now, months on, and I think the tool itself took several months to actually build, they decided that the tool itself was no longer fit for purpose. And how did they realize that? They realized that because when they went to end user training, and the training was delivered to end users such as the PMO community, myself included, they realized that there was actually a lot of problems with the tool itself. And the tool was not built in a way that worked for how the PMOs within that organization were running. Again, the actual change itself was not looked at from an organizational perspective, and the development of such tools was not incorporating feedback from the PMO community in this example. So you need to ask yourself, we need to think about, how do PMOs evolve? PMOs need to evolve to survive. Many would believe that the PMO community is in fact lagging behind project delivery. I mean, let's just face it, there are a lot of project delivery evolutions that have happened. I mean, we're seeing them with digital transformation. We're seeing them with rollout of Agile. We're seeing them over the years with all of the changes that are happening, even with the introduction of PPM tools that, didn't exist back in the day. And so the project management community as a whole is constantly striving to evolve. And we can see that, so we can see that happening globally. But when we look at PMO, just doing what you normally do a little bit better it's not evolving. It's actually just trying to survive. I mean, there's statistics out there that change around the how long a PMO survives. And I think there's some thought to be had around that. And that is PMOs that are being, so-called shut down may not necessarily be shut down because they aren't any good. They may actually just be shut down because the program finishes. And that's happened many times with some of the PMOs that I've worked in. But the PMOs that are being shut down for other reasons, or organizations that decide that the PMO needs to go because they want to save money and they think the PMO is the first place to cut money, is often they're not seeing the value. And if an organization and the community around you is not seeing the value that you're providing as a PMO, then something needs to change. And this is where I say that PMOs need to evolve to survive. They can't just stay behind project delivery and follow along and just react to whatever project delivery community is, asking of them. We actually need to look forward and look about how we can make changes to evolve so that we stay relevant, but also so the PMO itself can be seen as a important integral part of the project delivery community. See the PMO as the beating heart. And I think that evolution to different people means different things. And the evolution itself within the PMO, again, needs to be something that is assessed within the context of the environment that you're working in. What I can tell you is I've seen many times where PMOs have often become defective in some organizations. You'll see that when you see an organization advertise for the same job of a PMO lead or a head of PMO multiple times over. Ask yourself, why is that organization constantly advertising a PMO job that they just had advertised, only months before? I would say that there's probably a defective PMO in play, and it's probably not set up for success, and the PMO manager themselves may not be able to be successful because of the environment that they're working in. But if we think about some of the ways to avoid having a defective PMO, they include, and I'll go through 6 of them. Number 1, not having a clear vision on what type of PMO you have. As I mentioned earlier, there are different PMOs for different purposes, and depending on the type of PMO you have, it will be there for a particular purpose. Whether it's a project level PMO or an enterprise level PMO, make sure that you have a clear vision so that everybody is aware of what your purpose is, the value that you bring, and make sure that it's measurable. Number 2, not understanding the scope and purpose of the projects that you're supporting. As a PMO manager, it's imperative that you understand the projects that you're supporting. Now, you may not be involved in the delivery, and that's okay. That's what the project delivery teams are responsible for. But it's important for you to actually understand the scope and purpose of the projects. You need to understand what the end product is of those projects. You need to understand the context of what they're delivering, because it will help you to be better at your role when assessing things such as understanding where there may be risks that should be picked up that you could help the project community with. Understanding where they may need a particular type of resources and how those resources would fit in a particular project. Not understanding the scope and purpose of the projects that you're supporting is not good enough. You actually need to understand the space that you're working in. And it might not be something you pick up straight away. It might be something that you develop over time, and that's okay. But actually having a view on what that scope and what those projects are delivering is really important. Number 3, trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Now, change is inevitable, and just trying to create process for process sake or responding reactively to a particular request from a particular business unit for the sake of it without questioning these sorts of things is effectively you putting a square peg in a round hole. And that square peg in a round hole mentality is not good, because it will just overcomplicate things for you, and it doesn't enable you to work collaboratively within those other teams. Because what effectively happens is, by saying yes to everything, you're actually not looking at the things that are going to provide you the most value and aligns to the vision that you have set up for your PMO. Number 4, being rigid and refusing to change or adapt. Now, there are many PMO veterans out there that I would say would probably not be willing to change because they've done something the same way for a really long time, and they probably feel it works. And maybe in some organizations it does work. But there are many organizations where being rigid and refusing to change or adapt won't work. I worked in an organization recently where there has been a number of people within the PMO space that I am familiar with that were no longer required in those particular roles. Now, that may be because they were not able to change, or maybe they were rigid in their thinking, or maybe because the whole PMO model itself was too rigid, and so it needed to change. So in order to change and adapt is really imperative. For example, with all of this influx of Agile, whether we like it or not, we need to be able to adapt and change and pivot as needed to support the requirements of our project delivery partners and also the organization as a whole. And number 5, one of the ones that is a very, very, very common frustration of mine, reporting, but no one's reading them. How many times have you created a report and actually not received any feedback about it? I would say, do a test. Try this next week. Look at the reports that you create and think about which report takes the most time and you don't believe actually adds that much value, and stop sending that report for a few days or for a week or for the month or however frequent you send the report, and see if anyone notices. Often people request, and managers are very, very, very commonly guilty of this, requesting reports in a specific format and in a specific template, and it has to align this, and the color of the font has to be that, but they're actually not reading the reports. When I was working in a company a few years ago, I went in to set up a brand new PMO, and within that PMO function, I was required to provide reporting to a number of different departments, reporting to the Australia division teams, reporting to technology teams, reporting to business teams, reporting to steering committees, reporting to boards. There were so many report requirements. We added them up, and there was about 40 reports approximately on a monthly cycle. Now, those reports, some reports were daily updates, some were weekly reports, some were fortnightly, and so forth. When actually analysing and assessing the content of those 40 reports, we actually identified that many of them actually had repetitive information, and therefore did not provide the different areas anything really new. So we decided to reduce the number of reports after talking to our stakeholders and the people receiving the reports, and reduce the 40 reports into 5 key reports. And those 5 key reports were able to suffice and provide the context and the content required for the remainder of the program. So don't create reports if no one is reading them. They are some of the tips to avoid having a defective PMO. Hopefully they have been helpful. Thank you for listening again to this podcast for today, and I welcome any feedback. You can provide feedback on LinkedIn just by searching my name, Fatima Abuchi, Fatimah, surname Abbouchi, or you can go to our website, www.agilemanagementoffice.com. If you would like to request any specific topics for future podcasts, be part of our podcast, be a sponsor on our podcast, or get involved in any way, please do get in touch with us via our website, and we will be happy to discuss further. Until next time, I hope you've been able to learn, feel, think, or be inspired. Thank you, and have a great day ahead.